Hello everybody, UXW Bill here again, and today I've got another piece of audio equipment that I want to talk about. This is kind of a hasty product review, if you will. If there are any of you out there that are looking for a decent entry-level stereo receiver, and you're not particularly interested in a vintage piece of equipment, or you don't want to buy somebody else's problem, maybe you want something brand new. Well, if you look around, you'll see there's not a whole lot of choices on the receiver market today, although there are definitely more than I thought there were. Well, one of the choices that I came across was this Sherwood receiver. This is a Sherwood RX-4109. It's the same thing as their RX-4105, only in the case of this 4109, they exchange one auxiliary input for a phono preamplifier and input. So this is one of the few, if not the only, currently retailed stereo receivers to which you can directly plug your turntable. Now, you've seen this receiver in the Wharfdale Speakers video, if you watched that. You've also seen this receiver in the video where I fixed up that Sony linear tracking turntable. There's actually a story behind this receiver. I did not buy this new. This was an eBay find. And what I did buy new was the Best Buy branded version of this receiver, the Insignia NS-R2000. It's the same thing, just with a different faceplate. There are no differences to the internals between this receiver and the Best Buy one, other than what's on the front panel. Well, a lot of modern audio equipment is, in my opinion, kind of crappy compared to the old stuff. A lot of the old stuff would certainly blow a lot of today's new equipment out of the water with sheer power output and audio quality and things like that. At least that's the way I feel about it. Well, I wanted to see if these receivers were pretty competently built, because I'd heard in various product reviews on the internet of people blowing these receivers up, sometimes with sparks and smoke. Now, I never heard of any speakers being damaged, so that speaks well for the receiver to handle itself when things go wrong. But I was kind of surprised, to say the least, because as far as I can tell, these are excellent receivers. There's really only one problem with them. Sherwood really didn't give the final transistors in these things enough room to cool themselves well. There's a lot of ventilation on the bottom of the receiver. There's no problem with that. In fact, you can see that in there. There's lots of room for cool air to come in, as long as you've got it set on a surface where it can breathe. But when you look in the top of it, you'll see that the majority of the heatsink does not have any way to directly vent heat out of the top of the unit, which is kind of curious, given that there is a huge open area on the circuit board in here that really doesn't have a whole lot on it. I mean, this is a stereo receiver. Most of what's on that circuit board in there are either power components, such as the standby power supply and the main filter capacitors, or a bunch of wire shunts that are presumably used for fancier models. Anyway, to do my exploration, I bought this receiver on eBay for $30 shipped, allegedly broken. They said it powered on. Well, I powered it on, and I heard the DC protection relay shut off, and I was like, well, there can't be that much wrong. It turns out this was the only problem. The speakers were shut off. So I hooked up some crappy car speakers to it. I turned the speakers on, and lo and behold, wonderful sound comes out. Now, Sherwood tells us that this thing has 105 watts per channel power output into an 8-ohm load. They also tell us that if we're using a single set of speakers, they should be 8-ohm units, and if we're using two sets of speakers, they should be 16-ohm units. And I think that's where people have been blowing up these amplifiers, if they've been blowing them up. Because this thing, when you have more than one set of speakers turned on, it puts them in parallel. Now, a lot of receivers put speakers in series, but this one, for whatever reason, wires them in parallel, which means the effective resistance of the attached speakers drops. So if you have two sets of 8-ohm speakers attached, the resistance drops to 4 ohms. And of course, that's optimistic, because usually in a multiple speaker cabinet, not all the drivers are going to have the same resistance levels. Where I think people are going wrong is when they hook up something like, say, car radio speakers to this unit, because when they do that, the effective resistance for multiple sets of speakers drops down to just 2 ohms. And I'm sorry, but I don't think this unit is going to be stable at that low of a resistance level. So that's how I envision the people are blowing these things up. In reality, I don't think these are a bad receiver at all. I wouldn't say this thing is going to party the block down, but I had it hooked up to a set of Boston Acoustics bookshelf speakers and those Wharfdale speakers at the same time. Both of those are 8-ohm speakers. I let this thing play through a 3-hour radio show, and it never skipped a beat. Got a little warm, but I'm not too surprised by that. It certainly runs cooler than little Mr. Technics down there does. Anyway, it got a little bit warm, but it never skipped a beat. And, you know, when my favorite songs came on, you can bet I turned it up. And this thing, it didn't miss at all. It's got a very clean, very powerful sound. Looks like internally it's a Class AB design. It definitely has a push-pull output. I do think that they're probably stretching the wattage figure a bit. I don't think there's any way in the world with the current heat spreader and heat sink situation and the airflow that this thing is going to stay together very long if you've got it turned up just absolutely as far as it'll go. Which, it'll go up here. I don't know what scale this is measured in, but it'll go up here to about 62 or 63. I think that's just arbitrary numbering. Of course, you get multiple inputs. It's on the AM tuner right now. And there's the FM tuner, CD, tape, an auxiliary input, your turntable. And if for some reason you'd like to, you can defeat the tone controls by pressing the tone direct button down here. So if you've made some modification to the tone controls and you want to hear how the unmodified sound is, you can just push that button and they're instantly defeated. If you try to adjust them, you get an error message, probably to encourage you to turn the button off, so that you can then adjust your tone as you see fit. Some people have said that this receiver, I don't know why the treble's turned down, but some people have said that this receiver doesn't have a lot of bass. Well, I think that's just a byproduct of the fact that it really seems to reproduce sound in a pretty neutral manner. I haven't noticed a lot of audio coloration, at least not that I could say. It certainly doesn't, this little Technics SA929 down here that I've been playing with recently seems to have a lot more punch to it than the Sherwood does, but I imagine that's mostly sound coloration. Even with the loudness button off, and of course this thing has no loudness function at all, there's still a lot of difference in the amount of punch. Even with this thing's bass setting maxed out as far up as it'll go, it just doesn't have a whole lot of punch. But I don't view that as a problem. It'll certainly make enough noise, it'll certainly play loudly enough that you know that it's playing. And I'm sure that if you played it into a big enough set of speakers, you could probably have the police over before you knew it. So all in all, I think this receiver is really a pretty good design. And of course, then there's the serviceability that you have to think about. I really had to bother a man by the name of Jeff Hips at Sherwood America. His address is on the Sherwood America website. You can send him email if you have any reason to want service literature for your Sherwood receiver, and he might even send it to you. I hated to bug the guy. I'm sure he's busy. But it seemed that either he didn't want to reply to me at all, or his replies were extremely terse, which, given that he seems to have quite a presence in various audio forums on the internet, kind of surprised me. Anyway, he did send me the service manual for this receiver, and it appears that they really do intend for people to be able to fix them should they ever need to, because the service manual does have instructions for performing tuner alignments, and it does have a complete list of replacement parts that evidently you can order. They all have Sherwood part numbers, and there is a note in the manual that says, you know, if a part doesn't have a part number, then you can't order it. But for all things considered, and for the price, you can buy this receiver for less than $100. I think it's a heck of a steal. Out on back, there's only a few other things about this receiver that I wish it had. First of all, it's got an alphanumeric display, but it doesn't decode RDS. Models sold in the European region do. If anybody in the European region is watching this video and has one of these things going to scrap and has an RDS decoding board in it, I'd love to hear from you. Sherwood wouldn't send me one. The speaker connectors are a little annoying to use. You kind of unscrew them and then you stick the wire in there. But the audio connections are all gold-plated, and there is a decent connection for an AM and FM external antenna, as well as a turntable ground. So yeah, if you are looking for a decent stereo receiver either a starter set or something that you just don't want to pay a fortune for, I think this is definitely a receiver to look at.